Osio Nagata, Dakuroa, Sane Diskuski. Hello everyone, my name is Bryan Waytula. I'm a Cherokee artist, and today I'm going to be demonstrating just, not fully demonstrating, but just kind of sharing some of the things you see, the artwork that I do. Being a former teacher, 14 years, if you look at my body of work, it varies in mediums. From painting, charcoal, I can still weave baskets, I can still weave, I can do pottery, I can throw on the wheel. So as a teacher, you have to be pretty well versed in a lot of mediums, as you know. Otherwise, those kids, they're either not going to pay attention, you got to be good to grab their attention. So in my body of work, I worked in a wide range of mediums throughout the years, and I'm still learning new things every day. But one of the things that I've brought to Cherokee Art Market is wanting the ability to create something three-dimensional figures, but a little different than pottery or bronze even. Being a teacher, my salary wasn't very much, so working in bronze was too expensive. So I started researching and just really experimenting with different ways to create something three-dimensional using different mediums. So I stumbled upon using resin. So the figures that I've released, I think now for 6 years, which is a limited edition release that I do based on some of the stories that I've learned growing up, and then from one of our Cherokee treasures in storytelling, Robert Lewis, that tells. He puts so much animation and personality into the animals and the stories that he tells that they just became so much fun to listen to from him. And I wanted to do that with some of our animals and kind of put them into figures, give them their own personality, but with color. A little bit on how this works. So this year I have our foxes, which is how we say chula. I've had bears in the past, Yona, and it's kind of a neat teaching tool too, even for my son, so he's learning the names learning some Cherokee like I was taught as I'm doing my artwork. But to get to these points, I didn't bring any chemical because I didn't want the mask, the respirator. I didn't want to freak anyone out using chemicals live, and you wouldn't be able to hear me with my mouth muzzled because I want to protect myself from the fumes. Sometimes I forget to wear it though. And you might wonder why I've got Legos here too, because this is something new too that I've done for just this casting that I've learned along the way. So the first thing I start to do when trying to figure out what I want to do, and I've got some things in my sketchbook, I kind of sketch out just like many sculptors do. The figures that I want to do, I have just a list of animals that I want to create. So I'll go in and I'll start usually working on a piece of wood, and I work on sculpting with like an oil-based clay. And it's kind of like a polymer. But yeah, it's an oil-based clay so that when I do spray my eject mold release on it, so it won't adhere to it basically. So start usually with like a metal skeleton or a wire skeleton. So I'll add foil to the body, and then I'll start to add and shape a little bit with the oil-based clay. You can also sculpt in something, like clay, but the problem with that is getting solid. And my first attempt at doing that, they all blew up because they weren't completely dry. So if you've ever, kiln fired clay before, you know not to do that. And so all of them exploded. So I was experimenting with different ways. So the oil-based clay tends to work with all of that padding inside of it, and I can still sculpt and mold it away. So once I have my figure, and what I've done in the past, usually I would have foam board cut out, and this is the difficult way and why I like using my son's Legos, is to then go in and start to create your silicone mold that you'll do your resin casting from. So what I would do in the past is I would adhere this to one of the foam boards and then have to build my entire wall around it and then have to work inside this mold. Well, my hands are a little too big and it's really hard to get in there and work and smooth in clay. So what I did is this Lego mold, and the reason I like that is I can build it up, and as you work, and this is what I have just kind of in here right now, is we'll pretend this is clay. You want to build up half of your figure, and you guys have had the toy toys before, the plastic toys, like the Army men or the Cowboys and Indians that they used to put in the big bags. You get like 50 of them. They'd always have that seam, you know, that little plastic seam. So similar to that, it's the exact same thing. Is I want to find a seam on my figures that's not going to be too visually impairing my image, I guess, you know, where I can sand that away. And that's where you're going to build up half of your mold. So when I start to put a mold together, and I'll put this inside a mold, and then I'll build up my clay. So if this is empty, I'm going to build up my Legos around it about to the level that half of this is going to show through. And then I start to smooth that clay out, make sure it's all the way up to it so I don't have any undercuts. Otherwise, when you do undercuts, you're going to have your silicone and it's just not going to pour right. And then it gives you more things you have to kind of clean up in the end. So I get my surface kind of in clay with my figure in it as smooth as possible. And then with my mold, now that I'm using Legos, and the reason I do this is because with foam board I had to build it full, but with Legos I can stack and go so I can work and smooth right here without having to do this like I did in the past. Once I get my figure in here and I have clay to support it inside and I'm smoothing out and I have half of my figure ready to go, I'll go in and start to create my registration marks, which are these things. I mean, you guys, I'm sure, know what the registration marks are, and that's just to help keep your mold together. And before I finish, you guys are more than welcome to come up here too and see. I've got a one-piece mold and then a couple small two-piece molds, and then I had to, for one of my figures that I did, the War Turtles had a war club. So I had a one-piece figure, but then I had to actually mold a piece out of that so I could actually do another mold for his club and then adhere each one to those figures, because I just you weren't going to be able to mold a club in that and still be able to get it out of the silicone. So there's some models, depending on how advanced you really want to get them, that you might have to add things to and then do small molds aside, and then almost like a puzzle piece start to put them together. So once I put my registration marks around and I have my figure, the clay built up, I'll build the rest of my mold so that when it's tall enough so that when I do pour that silicone on top, I have, you know, probably about a good ½ inch of silicone to cover that. Now I do this is kind of like when I was working on my 66 Mustang rebuilding it. It's like a shade tree mechanic, because I don't have a pressurizer to take all the bubbles out. You know, I don't do this every single day like the professionals, and this is just kind of fun for me. So once I have my mold built all the way up, and I pour that after I spray my eject mold release, because I have forgotten to do that sometime. And it sits for probably a good 24 hours for me before I start to take my Legos apart. And what I do is I'll go ahead and that's why I threw this together loosely. So when I build and take my mold apart, so what you see is you'll see this on top, and down here you'll see half of my figure, but then you'll see all the clay, you know. And I think I used just a low-fire earthenware clay, just something that I can recycle again later. Nothing that I'm going to throw with or build with later. And then I'll flip this over. I leave my figure in, and then I just start to tear all that supporting clay off the bottom. And so you'll have, let's use this. Oh, I didn't think of this earlier. So this is the one actually that came out of my Fox. So if this were the base and I broke away my mold again, and I took all the clay off the bottom, I'll just keep that Fox, which is this one, in here, clean it off really good, because I'm going to have some clay parts in here. Just clean it off. Then I'll go back and do the second part of this, is just after I clean it, I build my mold back up again. This time I just have to build my Legos. So I'm just going to build, and I'm just going to throw these here for just visual. I'm not going to try and get it exact. So I build this all the way back up again with my Legos. Again, to about the height of the 1 inch or ½ inch that I want a silicone on here. For that, let that set another 24 hours, again, after I spray eject mold release so it doesn't stick together. And silicone, it's kind of wild that once silicone dries, they won't stick together. Like they won't run together. So, without spraying anything together, these two pieces, they'll never melt. Or I've tried that and I was like, oh, that doesn't work. I was like, darn it, a little piece came out, that I didn't want. And then I have to just do the whole process again. And it's worth it to just, instead of taking shortcuts, all right, I messed up, this piece ripped, let's just do it again. And then after I build my mold up to the height I want or the thickness I want of that silicone mold, let it sit for 24 hours. Do this fun part again, demold this, and we're gonna pretend again. So it would come out something like this after it's dry. And I'm just gonna look and I'm just gonna check and see, how it comes off. And then it, like I said, they're not gonna stick together. They come out these two pieces, okay? And that's how my mold is formed. And usually after that, the prototype is done. I just kind of toss it, or I'll set it aside in a box, remnants of what used to be. And so now I'm ready to start going into pouring resin. So the first step was just getting the silicone mold ready. And the reason I have, and you can see the importance too of those registration marks on this side. I have quite a few of them. You don't need this many. This is probably overkill, but this is just me not wanting a whole bunch of resin. You do all that work, and I don't want to pour my first pour and then you just see a pool of resin underneath it. So my first step, and I was doing these that you'll see today or have seen during my residency at the Idle-George Museum. So I was still teaching patrons or guests, that wanted to come down to see the visiting artist, what he was doing. They got to see kind of this process firsthand. So, and I have a company that I use. It's a 2-part resin. It's an equal part. So I'm just measuring. And usually when I'm doing this, what I'll do first is either I can fill it up with water and then pour it into a measuring cup. So then I know exactly how much volume that I have in here. I do use those equations for volume too sometimes when I'm working on the silicone, so I don't waste too much. So now once I get here and I've got my measurements on the exact resin I have, we'll say, 6 ounces. So I'm gonna have 3 ounces part A, 3 ounces part B. The working time on that resin, you have a little bit of time. It's probably about 1.5 minutes. So you wanna stir that up really well. I just use popsicle sticks. And my uncle's auto paint and body guy does a lot of the classic cars. So I learned getting the small measuring cups from O'Reilly's or something like that that can be disposed. So after I figure that out, I've got my my resin mixed up. I'm gonna pour that in here and I just let it sit for a little bit. And again, problem solving with my figures too, and why I haven't done deer yet. I'm still trying to figure out how to get them to adhere. Tiny little legs if possible. I put dowels in the bottom, and I can put a couple more of these, but I've never had to go more than just one. And with gloves, so like I said, I'm usually wearing gloves, a respirator, glasses, and my hat on backwards too to save what hair I have left. I'll just hold my dowel right here, and after that 1.5 minutes, the 2-part liquid will just start to heat up immensely. So you definitely don't want to get any on your hands. I mean, you will get a chemical burn. And I just kind of hold it here, or I'll use my pliers and try and center it. And then you'll see that liquid just start to heat up and kind of solidifies that dowel in there. And I let this sit for probably about 10 minutes. After that, 15 minutes before you want to start working with it, because it is still super hot inside this. And if you pull it out too early, that plastic still hasn't completely dried or solidified, so you are going to be able to move it or something. If I were to take it out right after it did that and set it here, it would bend, and I don't want to do any of that. And then after a little bit, 15 minutes or so, and like anything else, like I don't sit around for 15 minutes. Us artists, we're always got something else we're working on. So for 15 minutes, I'll go and spray paint, and then 15 minutes I come back and what I call do my demold. which he'll come out like this, but plain white, and set him aside, do it again, get my resin going, then I'll go spray paint and come back until I'm done with my addition. So if I was going to do 35, when I have 35 of these, you'll have some of the seams on here that come out, and I have my bear too that you guys can come up and see later if you'd like. These were last year's edition, so this is what they come out looking like straight out of the mold, this white. And you can get resin and put in dyes and mix it different colors if you want, but since I prime them and paint them, I just use white. So this was last year's, and so the seam that I had for this one runs all the way up along the middle of his head, and I made sure not to sand that off so you can kind of see what that seam looks like when he first comes out. And there's no dowel in here because I planned on having this one as my example, and I could set them like that, but I like having them on a base that I can sign, so that's the reason this one is just kind of freestanding. After I have my addition out and I have all 40, I'll go through and sand the seams off or any imperfections. And if you end up having a bubble, which can happen because the air can get trapped if you look at this and you're pouring, sometimes if you have something angled backwards, you'll have air. So there's a lot of problem solving. You have to look just at your sculpture if you're going to cast it again. You would have to build a vent, which I use with maybe a straw, small straw or toothpicks or something. Throw that together so I have an escape vent. So when I do demold that liquid's going to push here and all the way up. So after I'm done, I sand all those and I'm happy with them. I have air bubbles. I'll take a polymer clay and fill in those little areas, and that dries too. I make sure not to get the Sculpting though. I need it's an epoxy. It's like a two-part that you have to mash together and then put that in the holes or areas you want to fix. I'll take them and then start to prime them, and I have just an acrylic on this one. Then I go in and that's when they start to kind of take on a personality of their own. So each one takes on kind of their own personality with the colors that I provide. And then for the fox, and it was funny, I brought them in and I had one of the volunteers say, "Oh, I love your kittens." And I was like, "Oh no, I tried really hard to make it not look like a kitten or a cat." And that it is hard, and even a wolf, it's hard. So I had to make sure that the color palette that I used the same colors for the back of the ears, had to be a charcoal gray, the tail and the paws and the nose, but made sure that most of them had that white chest to kind of keep them so they visually look like a fox. And then I just started to experiment with the different color combinations on the outside. And like I said, you can leave them to where they sit freestanding like this, after some work or standing, or like I said, I like to do mine on a base and sign and number each one, and give each one a name. So that's why I use the dowel on here, and everything I use, I cut my own wood. I put the oil-based paint on there. I router the edges in my studio. So everything is hand done, even though I'm working in kind of I can't make the two-part resin or the silicone myself, but I make sure that I'm doing a lot of the woodwork, and even the decals, I design it and print those out and hand cut all of those too. So this is kind of what the end result looks like after they're painted. And then of course I'll go on with a Krylon, a crystal clear, to give it a nice protective coat, so that if somebody does spill cheese on it from their coning or something, from Sonic, that they can easily wipe it off and clean it up. So it does have a nice little shine to it too. But I've been fortunate to kind of stumble on this method and experiment a little bit, trial and error, and hopefully I can, teach other people how to do this small if they're interested. The one-piece mold right here, this one is really hard, and you can do a one-piece mold. The problem is you have to. So here's my registration, but to get it out is really trying. I had to have my wife a couple times but this is the trickster that I did, the rabbit, and we're gonna, I don't know if I can say or not, a teaser, but we have a 7-footer coming somewhere in Oklahoma, but it was based off of this one here, and he's upside down, so you see the feet, and sometimes on this one his hands were curled, so this was one of my really first ones. and I didn't have an escape vent off that hand that came back up. So some of them did have the bubbles on there. So I ended up having to go in and hand epoxy and use that hard drying plastic to fix those. But that's the one piece mold. And then you'll notice everything after that is a 2-piece. But I do have my bears, my Yona molds here. We have my turtles. Now I had to do two from my turtles because I made the mistake. I did it this way across the, instead of going vertical, I went kind of horizontal with my resin. It didn't work out, and I had a piece just on how my sculpture was designed, my turtles that year, ripped off, and I decided then to just keep it and go vertical with mine. So I had to do 2 molds for one of my editions. I think these are that's the bear. Let's see, what's this one? Yep, that's the turtle. And you'll notice this one's a little inclined a little bit because I knew I was getting a vent, or I had air trapped in there. So instead of just making a vent, when I poured it, I had to go that way. It's such a simple fix. I was like, I don't want to do a vent. So when I pour it, I'll just pour it this way. Yeah, that'll work. So, and then I would just lean it up against something like that. I make do with, I try and fix things or do them like I'm supposed to, but sometimes just like that. And then these were let's see, which ones were these? These were our wolves. So doing those, you could see that you don't see any legs. It's because they were down in here. So when I pop them out, and silicone's pretty flexible too. I mean, it'll move and do all this kind of fun stuff. So it was easy to get those legs to just pop out, but I had to make sure that the drying time was a little bit longer on those since I was going to be pulling them out and moving those. But and then for my turtles, like I said, I had one figure, and if you wanted to add anything to him, so say if I wanted to put a war club in his hand here, I could easily just drill, or I would have cast and sculpted in a void right here that it could have went in, and here's my war club for my turtles. It was just another one. So it was another piece, and then I used I think it was just a super glue, because with the plastic, it really took to both plastic surfaces and kind of just almost melted them a little bit together. And then just place it in there and you paint, and it's not going to go anywhere. And I use a liquid acrylic. There are some acrylics, so I tried to use a metallic too, but it's too thick, and when you make a dot with it, it tends to grab and lay down. So I use a liquid acrylic, and then I just take my eraser, and I use a wide variety of circles. So I have that one kind of as my biggest one, and then I flip that pencil around and then use the tip of that one, the tip of the pencil, and I just dot. And then I'll use paper clips and match heads. So, I mean, it's not as fancy as I'm sure some of you were expecting. It's just what I have. Yeah, toothpicks every once in a while. But once that paint starts to build up, then I start getting a variety of different sizes too. So on the match head, it can get larger, and then same way with the pencil eraser, it'll start to give me a larger circle if I want, and it dries. And then if I don't want that size, or it's not making a circle anymore for me, it's more like an egg, then I just peel that acrylic off and start over again. That's all I got. Thank you.